Look, it's a great privilege for me to be here, so thank you very much for inviting me. As Kerry just alluded there, the talk that I gave to North Melbourne, or Errol Street Primary School, earlier this year at Anzac Day, we were discussing that, and Kerry was talking about some discussion you have with Ted Bailey on other things which led to this talk today. So it's not the usual 11th of November sort of talk. There'll be a little bit of a challenge there. Let's see where we go from here. So, that's the general format of what I'll be talking about. Not in any particular order, and you'll maybe have to dig a bit hard to find some of those things in there. But over the years since World War I, 11th of November, might just close that door.
Yeah, we are. It's just that we're bringing in.
Oh, fine, okay.
It'll be close.
It's been a special day of commemoration internationally amongst those countries that were allies against Germany. And after years of systematic carnage, the war to end all wars was over. So a very significant date. In Australia and New Zealand, this day has been a significant day of commemoration too, but not with as strong a participation as Anzac Day. Anzac Day has tended to be our main commemoration day of war, particularly going back to World War I. But today certainly is Britain's Anzac Day, with marches and much ceremony around memorials and cenotaphs commemorating those who served, and especially commemorating those who died giving that service. In many ways, the memorials and cenotaphs have become the focus to the community collectively. And ordinary individuals who served and died are remembered individually, mainly by their families. Now, Kerry said before how much the Graduate Union and through Graduate House is looking more and more towards people things. The Graduate House is a building, it is a focus, it's the tangible point of contact, but the people are what make the Graduate Union, and the people are what makes a community. And so in many ways over the years, commemoration on the 11th of November has been about the war, about events, and collectively about people, but it hasn't always been about individuals. And during this 4 years of international centenary commemoration of World War I, 11th of November will become more significant than ever in Australia. As the 4 years progress and we all become better acquainted with the bloody battles as their centenaries are reached, we will all inevitably become more focused on the many sacrifices Australians made. Some of the biggest battles we still haven't heard about yet, and they'll come in the next couple of years. These individual commemorations will culminate on 11th of November 2018, when the centenary of cessation of hostilities brings a great sense of relief that was felt in 1918. And although this isn't part of today's talk, it's interesting to note some of those great institutions in Australia that popped up not long after 1918. You might remember, not remember, but you know about the influenza epidemic worldwide, pandemic in 1919 that killed many, many more people. And so in the early 20s, the Legacy popped up, the Smith family popped up, a whole lot of organisations that were about well-being of people, of individuals popped up. So what is more notable to date during these 4 years is how local councils and schools are showing their interest by researching the extent of their own community's involvement. This greater community interest is extending to all aspects of Australian society at that time. All over, sections of the community have shown interest in reflecting and exploring their own community's contributions and their effects on others, both collective and individual. One way they do this is by personalising the names on local honour roll boards and war memorials. Firstly, by checking their service records and enlistment addresses, and these are readily available online for most servicemen, and then exploring wider aspects of their lives to see what made them tick, where they came from, what families they came from, where, when they died, what they left behind. And this is where it came in that I was invited to speak at the school that two of my grandchildren go to in Errol Street. And what I did there was picked out from their honour board, it wasn't rocket science, I picked out some of the names, Googled those names, found out where they lived, looked at what their service record was, and in describing what some of these boys, and I pointed out all the kids were there on the playground, sitting on the playground, on the asphalt, poor kids. I was able to point out the building that had been built in 1878 that those young men would have gone to primary school in. So I could say to the kids, that's where they went, that building there, that's where they were taught. Then I explained when they joined up, how they got over there. There were some who, at this time, this was on the day before Anzac Day I was talking, I said right now they would have been on their ship on the way to the Dardanelles, knowing that in the morning they were going to be storming the beach. And amongst these boys that I picked out, or young men, some survived and some died, and then I was able to link that in to what would happen in dawn service, where that was a commemoration of the actual landing at Gallipoli, and how those boys that were there then would have found that, and then what dawn services then meant to those who came back, and what the march meant in terms of meeting up with their old mates again and remembering those who didn't come back. And I still get parents who are there listening talking about that because it brought home individual families. I was able to say where they live. I said, does anybody here live in number? And gave a couple of street addresses. Oh, you know, hands up. In some cases the house wasn't there, it was now apartment blocks, but the address was still there. And that personalised it for them. And I mentioned there Ted Bailey, that Kerry had spoke with him. He's been looking at this on a wider scale of trying to personalise the lives of people who served. Now, universities are such communities with a special richness because they provided highly skilled leaders and specialists during World War I, and of course in war since. And here within the sanctity of arguably the leading university in Australia, it's worth reflecting, as a graduate of New South Wales University, I'm still quite prepared to say arguably one of the leading universities in Australia, played in World War I, and to consider what contribution the University of Melbourne could make to this period of commemoration leading up to the 11th of November 2018. Now, today's talk's about university communities' involvement in World War I, and to suggest what may be worth considering as a lasting commemoration of University of Melbourne's own contribution to that war effort. So how best to engage the university generally in such a commemoration, bearing in mind that not everybody in the university always is about wanting to commemorate such things as war. And so it's got to be something that would appeal to everybody and not allow splinter groups to try and take ownership of an opposite thought. My talk concentrates on the Army, mainly because that's the base of my knowledge, and secondly because although involved similarly, the other services were numerically much less in World War I. So let's first look at the involvement of universities in Australia at that time. Now, they were the universities that actually existed before the First World War. Now, of those six, University of Tasmania, even though it was established in 1890, they only had 100 students by 1914, so they didn't really feature that much. And Queensland and West Australia universities were so new, really I haven't tried to look at those. But the other three, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, certainly not only made quite a contribution, it's interesting how the universities actually responded to the World War. First of all, Sydney University. There's a book of remembrance, and that has 2,037 names. And they have in each case the faculty, if they were students, or the degree, which was conferred on them if they were graduates. Of those 2,037, 230 lost their lives. Of those, there were 560 medical officers who went to the war, of which 32 died. On the 29th of October 1919, the university held a garden party in the grounds of Sydney University to honour returned servicemen. And apparently it was a massive event because it honoured those servicemen and had all their families there as well. All eligible members of the University Union were made life members of the Union, simply because they served. According to historian C.W. Bean, there was a Brigadier General William Holmes, who was the commander of the 5th Infantry Brigade, that was associated with recruitment of people in the university catchment. He wasn't a graduate, but he considered his militia-trained officers as either too old or lacking leadership qualities, and replaced them with university graduates. And this is where the universities played a big part. As most of you would know, the Melbourne University Rifles, that then became Melbourne University Regiment, was very much designed to train citizen soldiers to become officers. And the idea back when we had a peacetime, part-time army, it was the university graduates who were more likely to become the officers in the militia. The University of Adelaide, now bearing in mind that South Australia had a very large German descendant population. University of Adelaide, 14 staff and almost 500 students and graduates went to World War I. In 1916, now, next year we'll hear a lot more about the battles in 1916 that were horrendous. In 1916, when information was filtering back, the registrar wrote to all families inquiring how they were faring and received huge responses showing they were spread across all battlefields. Then, to ensure that South Australians knew why sacrifices were being made, professors were all got together and briefed, and they travelled throughout metropolitan and rural areas to explain what was at stake. They went out reassuring people that what their family members were doing over in France by that time were for the good of the country. So the university played a very big part. Bearing in mind too that a lot of these university people over there would have been officers and leaders in the field, so by their families reassuring them, those officers then hopefully would reassure the troops. Doctors for the front line. Just a few anecdotes here. Treating the wounded during World War I became a major challenge for Allied forces as a terrible injury toll mounted. Bear in mind that Australia's contribution here, because most people went to England for recuperation, we weren't quite ready for it here. We did realise that there was shell shock and there was gas, which were not the sort of things you'd treat in normal hospitals. And I thought that to look after all the returned servicemen coming back to Australia after World War I, building Caulfield Hospital for 200 beds would be enough to look after the number. Well, it was a little bit short. And the University of Adelaide's Faculty of Medicine responded to an urgent call for more doctors at the front line by fast-tracking its medical degree. The Defence Department issued an alert stating that 100 doctors were immediately wanted for the Royal Medical Service in addition to those urgently needed for the Australian Military Force. To help meet the demand, medical students at Adelaide volunteered to continue their studies during vacation periods so qualifying exams could be held 2 months earlier. And teachers in the Faculty of Medicine readily accepted the proposal and continued their lectures during the scheduled breaks. So that was a pretty massive undertaking. Just imagine if you tried to suggest that today in any university. Clive Burton was among the many medical graduates from Adelaide who had his studies accelerated. He died in tragic circumstances. After spending a month in the trenches in France, he caught measles, was then invalided to England because he was weak. He was catching a train and fell on the tracks and was killed by a train, which was unfortunate. But because he was really trying to get back into the field, he was still giving full military honours. It was that kind of, sort of, you looked after your people who were serving the country. Look, I won't. There were a number of anecdotes on there, which and what Adelaide University has done is taken individuals and shown on the website what these people did and what they may otherwise have done. There's one. Is a Rhodes Scholar, Alan Wilson Morey. He typified the brave and heroics of Adelaide University students who fought in the war. 5 Rhodes Scholars of the university took part in the conflict, and Lieutenant Morey was the only one to die after being severely wounded twice and volunteering to fight on after recovering. A brilliant medical student, he was badly wounded in the shoulder, the Battle of Loos, and awarded the Military Cross. University of Melbourne. There are 1,723 past and present students, teaching, administrative and ground staff of University of Melbourne enlisted for active service. 1,723. Of these, 241 were either former students of law or students who suspended their legal studies to enlist. Now, this came off the Law Society's website. This is why they're homing on law. 251 former University of Melbourne students died in battle or from wounds. That's 251 out of 1,723. Of this number, 50 were former students of law. So of the 241 law students or graduates, 50 died. Enrolments in the law school dropped by half as current and prospective students left for the armed services. The Law Student Society felt the impact of members enlisting. An argument over conscription divided the campus. A small number of opponents confronted an overwhelming majority in favour. Dean William Harrison Moore supported conscription, gave public lectures on wartime issues, and provided high-level advice to government. You'd probably be aware that we've had conscription on 4 occasions. 2 were popular and 2 weren't. The 2 that weren't popular, of course, were the later stage of World War I, when the population started to think we were just providing cannon fodder and thought it was about time we called it quits. The second time was Vietnam, and people didn't really see a threat of communism coming down through Southeast Asia. The 2 times that conscription was popular was towards the end of the Second World War, when the Japanese seemed to be getting pretty close. That made a lot of things popular. And the second one was the 3 months conscription national service in the 50s, when there was no war service involved. So, of the former law students who enlisted, one of the most prominent was John Monash. Now it's interesting because Monash was an engineer, but back in the days before MBAs, Monash was one of those who saw doing a law degree was a good way to get more business knowledge. But the Law Society, of course, adopted him as a lawyer, just like we Australians adopt Russell Crowe and Farlap and anybody who does well. So anyway, I've got down here as Monash, a law student, and of course arguably the most successful general of any force of any time, but certainly in the First World War. And also Harold Pompey Elliott, you may have heard of, was Bachelor of Laws before the war, Master of Laws after the war, who became a Brigadier General, was a very, very popular, very capable man who sadly committed suicide. I think the carnage that he saw that he had to oversee following orders finally got to him. A future Dean, Kenneth Bailey, one of the many law students who suspended their studies to enlist. Having seen active service in the 2nd Division of the Australian Field Artillery as a gunner, Bailey recommenced his studies at Melbourne in 1990 before being chosen as Rhodes Scholar. So a lot of these people, they were students, they dropped out of studies, went to the war, they came back and continued on great careers. And once again it goes on. One of the interesting stories from World War I is the often overlooked but incredibly important role of dentists. In the first 3 months of the Gallipoli campaign, over 600 soldiers were evacuated for dental reasons. And they went to the base hospital in Egypt to get dental treatment. To stem this inefficient system and deal with these often serious health problems, there was a call for dentally trained soldiers. And apparently in that month before they were evacuated, dentists at Gallipoli performed 180 fillings, 327 extractions and 60 denture repairs. So You see, the dental people are very good with their details. They're very, very accurate. The first director appointed the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, Gordon Clooney's Matheson, was killed at Gallipoli before he was able to take up his post. So a lot of tragedies came out of all this too. People with great promise that were killed. Now note that the law and medical faculties are the only University of Melbourne faculties to have placed such information on their websites. Other faculties and university colleges must surely have access to such information. The connection that has motivated the law and medical faculties is possibly explained by the nexus these faculties have with military leadership and professional service. From my perspective, it is not simply coincidence that these two faculties have taken this interest. There's a strong correlation between careers or faculties of study and the various Army Corps, and these two faculties are more identifiable than most. And most people think of the Army as the Army, and that's all there is to it. On the left-hand side there, I've listed some typical professions. And then the Army is made up of different corps depending on your specialty. And up until up to the level of battalion or regiment, which are commanded by a lieutenant colonel, people tend to all be of the one corps: infantry, artillery, armour, and so on, with their different callings. When you get above that to the brigade level, commanded by a brigadier, you have the mix. You have the infantry, the armour, the artillery, the engineers, all working together, so you've got a cohesive force. Now when you look down there, back in those days, to go into the cavalry, there's normally a farmer, because you had to bring your own horse. And so it's more likely that a farmer would have a horse. Also, as we became more mechanised, people on the farm were much better at improvising. They had all their machinery there that they had to fix themselves, and so to go into armour was a pretty natural thing, and they were there in the wide spaces and travelling and so on. Interesting enough too, bankers and accountants. Now, the more conservative ones you'd find going to pay corps because they're doing the same thing, just wearing a uniform. The more adventurous ones love to go into artillery because to fire guns you had to be accurate. And this tested one's ability to do mathematics, and nowadays computers, similarly, are so important for artillery. Teachers and educators and lawyers, now that's very interesting. Whereas you could go into education corps or the legal corps, very conservative. I reckon the reason why teachers and lawyers want to go into infantry is because infantry is the base level. Anybody going to infantry doesn't have to have any background at all. And teachers and lawyers want to rise above the herd, so best to go somewhere that's base level that nobody else by their training would know more than you do. And you see so many of the top leaders have come from a teaching or law background. In fact, even at the present time, you probably know Mr. Justice Greg Gard. He's a graduate of University of Melbourne. He retired from the Army Reserve as the Chief of the Defence. He's now a Supreme Court Judge, head of ACAT. Typical lawyer who joined the Melbourne University Regiment, became commissioned, and he, like so many other lawyers and teachers with him, went up to the top. The same with medicine and nursing. Now, obviously, so many doctors and nurses, if they joined up, if they were graduates, they would then go and do what they were trained to do. And so it was obvious that they were providing a service so essentially more, and it would be natural that the alma mater would recognise that. Engineers, the more conservative one, go to construction engineering, just building their roads and stuff. The more adventurous ones want to blow things up or do things quickly. You have the test of trying things out without having all the regulations that they've got to follow in a normal civilian climate. And so it goes on. And that applied back in the First World War, the Second World War, and even today, where we find that people who come through universities with their backgrounds are going to be linked to particular corps that require those particular talents. Some of you may or may not be aware, more recently here, the engineers are very humble people. They generally do very well when they can get extra information beyond pure engineering, which is in many ways why the MBAs took off with engineers. But some little while ago, the registrar here, Ding Bell, ADF Bell, he'd been the Army's engineer-in-chief before he retired from the Army and became registrar here. Peter Groshen, a recent Chief of Defence Force. He got his honours in engineering here at Melbourne University, then he did economics and arts later on. Jim Potter, who for a long time here was a registrar, was a reserve colonel in the Signals Corps. So we had this long-standing nexus in many ways. These are just a few of the people. Engineer graduates are always hard to find places for in the Army because they all want to be engineers, and there just aren't enough officers to accommodate them all, so they're not carpenters or plumbers or electricians, so you've got to find other things. They love doing things practical, so you put them on bulldozers and hope for the best and so on. So what also comes through clearly is the support servicemen in World War I would have felt from not only their families but also their alma maters. And contrast this with how servicemen in Vietnam felt. I know when I was in Vietnam, I had all these national servicemen coming to me all the time because I was getting these hate letters from university people under people like Albert Langer and so on, who were looking at maybe their grand vision but losing sight of the fact that individuals count. And some of those people really suffered psychologically through some of that activity. Of course, the Graduate Union has strong, well-known visual ties with World War I, through Sir John Monash being the first president, and Sir William Wallace Stewart Johnston, senior medical officer. So once again, law and medicine, they come through. And of course his name is given to the library here. So what else might the members of the Graduate Union wish to do? Well, here are just a few thoughts. Wouldn't it be lovely if all the faculties, all the colleges, and this links in with Kerry's idea of linking it in with the United Nations goals, of in the name of humanity, if all those faculties and colleges at the university could start to dig in and recognise people who've given service. Now, in this 4 years, World War I becomes an obvious focus. It doesn't have to be purely World War I. But a great research project, because so much information is there just for the asking. And so, and also, Kerry talked about, this is where we started talking about this subject, about the square that's in the form of a U that Graduate House is in. It forms a U, and that the U is what started us thinking about the U's in university, uniform, unity, and so on. But a lot of the people living around that square went to the First World War. So the university is not just about the staff and the graduates, but the university has a precinct. And the precinct almost is a town or a city in itself. And people around here were people, whether they went to university or not. They were the neighbours. They were part of this community. And maybe once again that the university can take a lead in linking up with the community that was there then and is there now in such a way. What I'd like to do is just taking a few names, just some examples there. These are very simply found on the web. People who either lived nearby or had some linkage with the university. For instance, John Fleming there, 141. That's the house, just across the other side of the square. That's where he lived. It sold recently for 2.3 million. I don't think John Fleming would have seen much of that. He's a police constable. He lived there, he was single, lived with his mother. He became a gunner, an artilleryman. And he left in December 1916 to go over there. And he didn't have a distinguished service. He came back. And for all we know, he lived a normal life, which was great. Edward Gordon Holden. Now, he lived in 228 Leicester Street, just down here on the corner. And He was a labourer, single, lived with his mother. He went over in 1915, July 1915, and he was with the light horse. Didn't have a horse, but he went with the light horse. So, and he came back, he returned, which was lovely. Then John Charles Cherry. He lived here in Leicester, a bit further down, not quite in the square, and he was a driver with the field ambulance. So, although he wasn't a doctor, he certainly went over with them and had a very distinguished career over there. He mentioned dispatches 3 times. He got the Meritorious Service Medal. He got the Military Medal because, as a driver, he took great risks to get rations through to the troops. And he also came back. Robert Fowler. And Robert Fowler, he lived in Coniston, but he was a medical... before him was Stanley Earls Craig. He was a medical student, lived in Parkville, 23, hadn't graduated. He joined on 27th of August 1914. In other words, just as war broke out, he gave up his studies to go overseas, and he served with the 1st Light Horse Field Ambulance. So even though he wasn't a doctor, he served with the field ambulance up front, looking after the wounded. And fortunately he returned here 5th of July 1915 because he was wounded. And Robert Fowler, medical practitioner in Collins Street. He went over there as a captain. He was also with the 1st Light Horse Field Ambulance, promoted to major, and he came back in 1918. Now they would have been Melbourne University student and graduate who went over there, and they fortunately both came back. John Gordon and James Gordon, they both enlisted at the same time at age 18. Must have been twins. John Gordon, he joined a singles company, and he came back in 1919. James, though, he was a yardsman before he joined up. He joined 29th Battalion D Company. Sadly, he was killed July 1916. No known grave. The fact he died was notified to the authorities by the Germans, and so on. So every one of these people has a story, whether they're local residents or whether they were students or whether they were graduates. It could have been staff. So this idea of immortalising the names of those who served in World War I could extend to other precincts around the university in recognition of former neighbours. And because only 723 graduates or students who went, maybe that's not too hard for a university size to do some more towards remembering them. And to achieve any result in life, one must first have a champion or champions who are driven by the cause and have access to necessary approvals and resources, which, hello, we have a graduate union. In this case, the champion has to be the University of Melbourne, or at least an influential element of it, and the graduate union, which is about people who've served and been part of the university, or any university, would be a wonderful one to do it. So the stakeholders must include the other owners, occupiers of buildings in the U as well, and maybe other precincts. So maybe such a display of interest in local history and compassion mark a goal for the graduate union into the future. I suggest this approach could engage all sections of the university community, including those whose leanings are away from recognition of any aspects of war. One definition of left-wing politics includes concern for those in society who are perceived as disadvantaged relative to others, and those who serve and didn't return, or who return in poor shape, and their families certainly fit that definition. So I think anybody in the university could be included. And I'll finish with a quote from a Monash University student who visited Gallipoli in April 2015, this year. We spent 10 days hiking those cliffs. We learnt the harsh realities of the terrain, covered in bruises and pierced skin from taking a fall down a rubble, dusty path. The smell of thyme beneath our feet I had welcomed until I learnt that it had been planted to cover the smell of rotting flesh. One misplaced foot on the steep cliffs and there would be a great distance to the ground. My full attention turned to my next step. How could they have done this under gunfire? How could they have done this carrying 20-kilogram packs? This heavy, sinking feeling follows not only myself but also many of the students who I travelled with. Unlike me, some felt strong connections and knew the stories of their great-grandfathers and families. At Lone Pine Memorial, I struggled to comprehend the volume of names remembered. Those without graves, it is easy to walk by them and not know their stories. I touched the name on the wall and said a prayer, just in case his loved ones had never had the opportunity I had to visit them. I am a 21-year-old girl, a pacifist. I had always believed that war was bad and not to be glorified. But here we commemorate the fallen. Turks, Anzacs, women, men, everyone. We are united by the memory of their sacrifice at this sacred place. And I suggest that united is the most lasting commemorative view of all. So I'm going to commend you to think about those points there, and it's over to you.